Give her plenty of time. Don't do anything until Schenectady backs down and gets figured out.
Carpenter, this is Denver.
This is a story that has been nearly 90 years in the making.
Carpenter, this is Denver. Roger, would like to rendezvous 8 miles west of yesterday.
Yeah, there he is, right over there.
Before we could bring it to you, more than 1,500 lives had to be lost, and more than 8 countries were to become involved. As a feat of sheer technology and daring, it rivals man's first trip to the moon. And as a feat of sheer logistics, it compares with the invasion of Normandy. Hello, I'm Doug Llewellyn, and during the next 30 minutes, we are going to report on one of the most amazing news stories of the century.
Look, that's it, gentlemen. I've given you everything I can for now.
This out of Washington. Sources at the Pentagon have confirmed that an attempt will be made to locate and then actually raise the 70,000-ton British ocean liner Titanic, which went down in 1912 after striking an iceberg in the North Atlantic. The legendary ship was thought to be unsinkable, so advanced were her safety features, but it was on her maiden voyage that the tragic wreck occurred.
The story begins with what turns out to have been an astonishingly accurate prediction. Back in 1898, a young writer named Morgan Robertson wrote a novel about an Atlantic ocean-going liner, far bigger and more luxurious than any the world had ever seen. Fully loaded, Robertson's imaginary liner weighed 70,000 tons and was the length of 3 football fields. She stood 11 stories high and carried the rich and the celebrated to their destinations at the then unheard-of speed of 25 knots. Then, on a cold April night in the North Atlantic, Robertson's vessel, which was considered unsinkable, struck an iceberg and went down in a matter of hours. The name of this imaginary ocean liner was the Titan. If all this sounds familiar, it's because, of course, it really happened. 14 years after Robertson's prophetic novel, when a real ship sank on her maiden voyage on the night of April 14th, 1912. And as all the world still remembers, her name was not Titan, but Titanic.
What did you see?
Iceberg, dead ahead, sir.
Iceberg, dead ahead, sir.
Order starboard. Order starboard, sir. Pull us down, both.
What's that, sir?
Close watertight doors.
The Titanic story, as you well know, has been told in countless books, dramatizations, and motion pictures. It is not a story that we propose to repeat here, because what we are about to show you is even more incredible than the sinking of the Titanic.
What we should do when we get on the bottom is make a survey.
Ever since that April night in 1912, men have dreamed of bringing the Titanic back. But until recently, that seemed an impossibility. For one thing, no one is even sure precisely where she lies, some 2 miles below the surface in total darkness.
Coast Guard vessel off my starboard bow.
Nevertheless, 2 separate groups have recently turned their attention to the Titanic. One is interested in locating, entering, filming, and salvaging parts of the ship. The other has taken on the challenge of raising the entire ship, or rather of creating the illusion of raising her for a motion picture. We visited both operations, one real, the other imaginary, and discovered that the problems they expected to encounter, along with their solutions, were almost identical. Well, how are you going to find the Titanic to begin with? Where is she, Admiral?
We have the approximate longitude and latitude of where it went down. It was very well documented and recorded. The problem is where on the bottom it sank. We don't know what its drift would be going over 2 miles down.
In Abilene, Texas, a team of underwater explorers headed by Texas oil man Jack Grimm, Captain Art Markell, and expedition leader Mike Harris is busy planning phase 1 of what is expected to be a 2-year search and salvage operation involving the Titanic.
First thing we should do, I believe, is make a survey of about 5 square miles of the whole area around the Titanic, the major hull, and map all of that debris, and so that we know precisely where it is.
It's located approximately at this point here. Here's Newfoundland, Cape Race, St. John's, and as you come off of the continental shelf, you come down along the J anomaly, and you'll see a little pinnacle here that is a volcanic cone, and it's in the dark area just to the east of the volcanic cone. As you know, the North Atlantic is a large area, and you're out there on a ship. You don't have any land fixes, although with satellite navigation and other modern-day range-finding equipment, we'll know where we are at all times. Problem is, we don't know exactly where the Titanic ended up.
The Royal Mail ship Titanic. Where is she now, and how do we get her up? That's our problem. This was her course, this orange line. A southwesterly track from Southampton to her final radioed position. Latitude 41 degrees 46 minutes north, longitude 50 degrees 15 minutes west. You can see it more clearly here in this enlargement. The Titanic thought she was here, Carpathia had her here, and Mount Temple here. So this will be our starting point, right in the middle of this triangle.
So, one way or another, we're in the ballpark.
The trouble is, sir, it could wind up being a damn big ballpark. We're talking about 2 miles underwater, maybe more. Everything at that depth is a mystery.
The first phase is a search mission, and once we've found the ship, we hope to identify it by the use of television and cameras. The second thing we would plan to do is to try and photograph as much of the ship at one time as possible. In other words, we'd like to make a mosaic of it, a full-length picture of the whole ship, which is 850 feet long. Well, that's very difficult in the deep ocean because it's black. So our main problem is lighting. How are we going to light this ship up? And of course, one of the things that we'll be looking for first will be this cut along her starboard side, about 1/3 of her length, where she hit the berg.
Numbers 1 and 2 holes, the mail room and boiler room 6 and 5. That means a gash 300 foot long from there to there, below the waterline.
Well, what's the answer?
She's going to sink, Captain.
Admiral, assuming you can find it, how can she float? She has a hole in her side, right?
Yes, has a hole about 1/3 the length of the ship on the starboard side. We're able to work down there. As we can work in space, we also can work under the oceans. And we're going to put plates along this slash in the side of the hull.
I understand you're going to use some kind of foam to try and refloat her?
A synthetic foam, which we pump in under high pressure through various parts of the hull.
This is a solid foam, like an epoxy matrix, which has small glass microspheres in it. These are embedded in this epoxy matrix, and it makes large blocks of material. And so this would be pumped into the interior of the ship, all the voids. It would displace the water, and this foam would then harden up in place, and it would give buoyancy to the ship. In addition to the foam pumped inside the ship, you would also attach to the outside of the ship large gas generators like balloons. Then at the proper time, these generators would be activated and they'd fill these balloons with gas, and that would give the buoyancy to start to lift her off the bottom. And finally, to break her free of the bottom, we'd use a series of explosive charges to break the suction from the bottom sediment to get her started, and then she'd hopefully come up.
The fact that the Titanic rests 2 miles down on the ocean floor turns out in some ways to be quite an advantage.
The deep ocean is not like anything that most of us have seen. The fact that there's no sunlight penetration below about 1,800 feet in the sea means that there's no plant life. It's cold, on the order of 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and there's very little oxygen at that depth. The animal life that's there, many of them have no eyes because they've become adjusted over generations of living in the dark. So if I had to guess as to the shape that the Titanic might be in, I'd guess that it's in very good shape.
Yeah, I assume that we will find a light layer of silt on the Titanic, and the rest of it will be perfectly clean and almost as new as the day she sunk.
The evidence seems to indicate that she probably is all in one piece. Although she may have been holed. She pitched up vertically just as she went under. Some of the boilers may have come loose and gone through the front.
It was probably going in the neighborhood of 12 knots. A lot of speed, a lot of momentum, and all of these things like the stacks and the masts and a lot of the loose gear may have broken off.
Of course, we'll have a pretty good idea from after the first phase. After we discover the Titanic, we'll know that she's lying on her starboard side or her port side or where chunks of the boilers fell out or they didn't fall out. So you'll have some idea. So we're not going to be stumbling into some extraordinary dangerous spot.
I presume these are all metal cables and they're not rope or hemp of some kind, which would have disintegrated by now. The funnels are large enough, what, they're 15 or 20 feet across, 50, 60 feet high, so I don't consider them a navigation problem. But due to the minor currents that there are moving in a southerly direction, why won't these cables be swinging back and forth like an eel or a snake in the water?
We're going to equip the manipulators with cable cutters so that we can cut ourselves free. But our basic problem will be to stay away from the cables.
Each team had to work out its own solution to the problem of working efficiently at a depth of more than 2 miles. How massive an operation is this, Admiral?
Gigantic. We're using the submarine force, submersibles, all the workers underwater. We're using remote control devices with arms on them that can pick up a teacup.
The Texas-based explorers are planning to use a remarkable vessel of their own.
This is the Illuminaut that was conceived by Lewis Reynolds, part of the Reynolds Aluminum Company. It's an all-aluminum submarine. It's the only one that we know in the world. It has a design depth of 15,000 feet. Up forward are 4 viewports, wide-angle viewports, which will be used by the captain, the pilot, to maneuver the submarine around the Titanic and the debris on the bottom. Also up forward is a television camera, lights, still camera, and motion picture camera that are on a pan and tilt mechanism so that we can photograph off to the side or up above or down below.
That may sound easy, but there are serious risks involved.
The Illuminaut has only been to 6,500 or 7,000 feet. As you know, the design depth is 15,000 feet, so we'll send her down to at least 15,000 feet before we subject myself, the other scientists and documentary film people, before we put her in there to 12,000 feet. We want to make absolutely certain that she can withstand the pressures. In fact, it's only in the last few years that the technology has become available so that we positively can find the Titanic and can go down to it with the submarine, the deep diving submersible. This is all very feasible. It's not pie in the sky, and we plan to do it.
Can they do it? Raise the Titanic.
Can it be done? A ship that big, down that deep?
It's never been done before, no question about that. But we did raise that nuclear sub a couple of years ago.
What about it, Jim? Biggest marine salvage operation anybody's heard of. Dirk says he can handle it. I'm willing to go to the president and do my best to push it through.
It's the biggest job with the highest stakes anybody ever dreamt of.
It's a fascinating idea, But can they really do it?
That would be probably the most challenging thing that has come our way. It would be a challenging operation, no question about it.
Jason, you see what in other words?
Well, yes and no, because the most difficult part of the project, raising the 70,000-ton Titanic from the bottom of the sea, is the only part that won't actually be accomplished. At least, not yet. Except as an incredibly accurate recreation of the real thing for the motion picture Raise the Titanic.
A couple of things that surprise me most about Raise the Titanic are the factors that, first off, the film is costing more than 2.5 times what it actually cost to originally build the Titanic, and the fact that they have filmed just about every place except where the Titanic actually sank. They have filmed here in the Pacific off the coast of San Diego, and then in such diverse locations as Alaska, Washington, the Chesapeake Bay, England, and here in Greece, where we will actually go aboard the RMS Titanic. In the motion picture business, it is a fact of life that the technicians have become a part of the new elite in Hollywood. Now, here in Athens, Greece, the technicians have accomplished a seemingly impossible task. They have recreated the Titanic.
Not a model or a miniature, but a full-scale recreation of what marine experts agree is the way the Titanic looks today after spending almost 70 years on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. Certainly not the majestic beauty she once was. Nevertheless, stunning today in a totally different way. After all, how often has man had the opportunity to walk the decks of a superliner brought back from the grave, and to visit the majestic Grand Salon? Hard to believe that this was once the great hall of the most luxurious ship ever built. In this room, members of some of the wealthiest, most influential families on the face of the earth once socialized in royal splendor.
Good evening.
A combination of furs, jewels, perfume, and champagne, and what was described as the sheer smell of wealth created an ambiance of luxury and power. Yes, the Titanic was truly something very special. While she no longer resembles a great floating palace she once was, with her grand ceremonial staircases, silk drapes, plush carpeting, and statuary now encrusted with silt and eroded, there is still something very haunting in here. A reminder of the craftsmanship, the devotion, the care, and the sparing of no expense that went into making this vessel the ultimate in every detail. Today, there is an equally dedicated team of artists and craftsmen at work creating something that will ironically be more permanent than this great vessel. A movie.
Yeah. All right. You're going to find the notch. If you'd like to do it, we got to have a rehearsal.
Here.
Yeah.
From the top.
Jimmy, we might as well get everybody in tune. They're in the picture back there.
I didn't see that. A lot of the films, and all of the films, have been about the Titanic's maiden voyage and the sinking of the Titanic, and we're doing the story of raising the Titanic, and that makes it kind of unique and different.
I think that Raise the Titanic is a whole new point of view from the Titanic pictures that have been shown before. Raise the Titanic is a modern-day film, and the method of raising this ship is really quite fantastic.
Since the inception, we had to, of course, tackle a problem of how are we going to film it, what concepts were involved. We've made countless trips around the world in search of a ship that would pass
for the Titanic in characteristics similar to the Titanic, and that's hard to do nowadays since 1912 is long gone, plus submersibles. The Deep Quest from Lockheed weighs 40 tons. We have the hydrazine tanks, which is 60 feet in length, and even the Navy's saying, my gosh, you know, where did you get that?
It is most incredible. I mean, I first was involved down in Washington where we used the Pentagon. We used Andrews Air Force Base, where just the logistics of getting these things into shape, and the days we can use them and when we can't.
A lot of telephone bills and that sort of thing, but that's what it takes nowadays to make a picture of this magnitude.
What do you think the eventual total cost of this movie will work out to be?
I'm leaving now.
Is it possible, do you think, to raise the Titanic?
Yes, it certainly is, if you don't ask the cost. All of the technologies that we've tried to represent in this film as technical advisor for the film are here today or in the near future. And if they're put together in the right way, you could indeed raise the ship, but it would be very, very costly. In fact, if the ship were rolled out of pure gold, if the hull were pure gold, you probably couldn't recover the cost of salvaging it. But it is feasible.
We're dealing with a real ship, a real set of circumstances. Everything that we're doing is technically correct and feasible. I think nostalgia connected to the Titanic. There's a tremendous curiosity from school children on of what would you find when you raise a ship of this size. It still contains a very valuable cargo. It's going back in time. It's having the opportunity to go into a tomb, if you will, like Tutankhamun.
It's about a ship, the Queen of the Sea. It's about men and women, and it's a roaring adventure story bringing the two elements together in a very exciting, fulfilling, and adventurous motion picture. It's not a disaster story that happened many, many years ago. It is an adventure story, and an entertaining one.